we're going to go ahead and get started. And I have with us John Ball with the City of Los Angeles and Ryan Parks with Larry Walker and Associates. And I want to give them as much of this hour as possible. But John, would you introduce yourself? Maybe tell everybody a little bit about yourself, and then it's all yours.
All right. Thank you, John. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Yes, my name's John Ball, and I'm from the city of Los Angeles. I work in the Bureau of Sanitation, which is under Public Works Department. And specifically, I work in the Watershed Protection Division. And my experience is really in water quality monitoring and compliance with total maximum daily load requirements. I'm joined with my colleague here, Ryan Parks from Larry Walker and Associates, and he'll be presenting later in our presentation. He's the consultant that's working with us on this really neat monitoring, this study that we're going to discuss today. So go ahead, Ryan, you can advance the slide. So just an overview of what we're talking about today. We're going to talk about a street sweeping study that LA Sanitation is working on, and I'm the project manager for that. Basically, why is LA San interested in street sweeping? I'll be talking about that. Then I'll hand the presentation over to Ryan, and he'll talk about specifics of our study and what kind of data that we're collecting to inform enhancements to street sweeping that can lead to better water quality. Ryan will also talk about other case studies and some specific results that we've gotten from our first phase of testing that we've completed, and kind of where we're going to go from there. Next slide. Okay, just a little more background on the city of Los Angeles and specifically the Bureau of Sanitation. So this is I work for LA Sanitation, and sanitation is primarily focused on wastewater treatment, watershed protection, which is the group that I work in, which is stormwater management, and then also managing our solid resources or our trash. There's also a lot of other work that's done with sustainability. We have a really neat biodiversity program and have a lot of really talented engineers and scientists within our organization. The one thing you don't see on this slide is a street sweeper. Actually, sanitation is not responsible for the street sweeping program in Los Angeles. Let's see. So the main mission of LA Sanitation is to protect public health and the environment. And the division that I work in is primarily focused on stormwater quality and how that impacts environmental health and public health. Los Angeles is a pretty big city. It covers a large geographical area. There's 4 million residents. Sanitation is a big organization in itself that we have 25 separate divisions. They kind of fall under those main categories of wastewater, stormwater, and solid resources. We have over 3,000 employees. And the group that I work in, Watershed Protection, we are mainly focused on compliance with our MS4 stormwater permit. And we're looking at ways to reduce pollution to our local water bodies and protecting our beneficial uses. So if sanitation doesn't oversee street sweeping, why are we interested in that? Well, we have some challenges in terms of water quality. Just that's going to be inherent when you have 4 million people living in a region. And we'll get into some more specifics on this, but there's a lot of efforts that are going on to improve water quality. A lot of it has been focused on um, infrastructure projects that capture and treat stormwater. Um, but those can be pretty expensive, as other presenters have were discussing in the previous seminar. So we see street sweeping as an opportunity. We can get at pollutants before they enter our MS4 system. And I've been told, and I believe this, that it's a cost-effective alternative to structural BMPs. So in order to maximize the benefits of street sweeping in terms of water quality, uh, we need to we've realized we need to collect some data on this and kind of test for ourselves in our local area. How can we make improvements to our existing street sweeping program? Um, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So see, here's a listing of some of the water quality challenges that we have in the city of Los Angeles. And actually, these are not just specific to city of LA. There's many other municipalities that are represented in this map. But this shows about four of the major watersheds that the city of Los Angeles is located in. So the one in pink is the Los Angeles River. That's our largest water body, watershed. The one in the blue is the Bionda Creek. The one in yellow is the Dominguez Channel. It drains to the LA Harbor. And green represents the local creeks and storm drains that discharge to the Santa Monica Bay. So we have TMDLs established in all of these watersheds. Bacteria is ubiquitous throughout. Metals, including copper, lead, and zinc, are included in all of these. I think Santa Monica Bay might be an exception to that, but we do detect metals in the runoff to Santa Monica Bay. Trash is a problem region-wide, and there's a trash DMDL in place. We also have these legacy organics like PCBs and DDTs, and even though those haven't been used for decades, we still detect these compounds in our runoff samples. We also have issues with nutrients, and there's TMDLs for nutrients in our local lakes. And there's some modeling that's been done that shows that nutrients can impact the water quality and in the ocean as well. So in addition to the total maximum daily loads that are in place already, we're seeing these emerging concerns like current use pesticides. Microplastics is another one, PFAS, and there's others. And I'm sure that you've heard a lot about these in other settings. Next slide, Ryan. So we do have these watershed management programs that are in place. These were incentivized by our MS4 permit. And for each watershed that I just showed you, we have a watershed management program. And basically, these are a roadmap for how we can attain the water quality requirements that are required of us. And the end goal is to protect those beneficial uses such as recreation and freshwater and saltwater habitat. So how do these watershed management programs work? Well, they determine how much stormwater must be captured and treated. So how much capacity or volume of stormwater needs to be treated. It identifies the BMPs and the locations where they're needed. And there's an optimization algorithm that's run through modeling, and it finds the most cost-effective BMPs. In the end, it provides basically a recipe or a list of BMPs that are needed. Part of this program is also demonstrating to our Regional Water Quality Control Board that this recipe of BMPs will indeed result in the water quality that needs to be attained. That's also referred to as a reasonable assurance analysis, RAA. Okay, so we have some challenges with these watershed management programs. They're significant, and they provided a roadmap. So now we have this roadmap, but there's a lot of hurdles to get over. So one of the biggest hurdles is just the capacity that is needed to treat all this stormwater runoff. So we like the Dodgers here in LA. So this graph shows basically the capacity, the treatment capacity that's needed in each of our major watersheds. So we've termed it in terms of Dodger stadiums. Like, how many Dodger stadiums would you have to fill up to treat the necessary amount of stormwater runoff? You can see Upper LA River, we have nearly 6 Dodger stadiums to fill up with stormwater runoff. So every time it rains, imagine filling up a stadium, 6 stadiums of water. So that's what we're up against. If you take all of the watersheds, that's about 11 stadiums worth of water treatment. And that's just an enormous volume to deal with. So that is definitely one of the biggest challenges, to the point where we wonder if it's possible. Another challenge would be just the cost associated with that. And we've made some headway on this, but basically the pie chart on the left shows kind of the total, the funding that would be needed over a 10-year period is up to about $6.5 billion with a B. And you contrast that with the revenues that we have available to us, which is on the right-hand side. We're looking at $1 billion over a 10-year period. Now, in our region, in LA County, we just have this new stormwater fee that was passed. It's the Safe Clean Water Program. Measure W, may have heard of it. That generates a lot of money for us, but you can see we're still only about 1/6 of the way there. So there's a lot of cost associated with meeting water quality. The other challenge, or it's more than a challenge, it might be an impossibility, is we have this roadmap, but the deadlines that we're dealing with for compliance are right upon us, and they've been in place for a while. So it's not like we haven't known about these deadlines, but you can see in Bino Creek we have deadlines in 2026 that we're supposed to meet our water quality compliance milestones in less than 2 years. So similarly, Santa Monica Bay has an important deadline for meeting bacteria standards in wet weather. And we've already passed some of the dry weather deadlines. Other watersheds are on different schedules, but there really isn't not enough time to implement the number of projects. We don't have available funding. So you can see that we definitely have our challenges. And I think that's kind of why we're looking to other solutions to augment the efforts that we're doing right now. So that is why we're looking at street sweeping. How can street sweeping improve water quality? So we know that the material on streets, also known as street dirt, does contain a variety of pollutants. Some of this comes from vehicle emissions and wear products. I've learned over the years that tires have a lot of zinc in them, and brake pads, at least in brake pads have traditionally had copper in them. In California, there's a brake pad initiative that was passed, and so we are reformulating our brake pads in California. I'm not sure what the rest of the country's doing that. So we're hoping that 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 will be effective, but um, there, regardless of that, we know that there's just a lot of pollutants that end up on the streets. Even the street material itself, the roadbed material, is contains heavy metals and PAHs. And then, as people fertilize their lawns or parks, use pesticides, there's pet waste that end up on the streets. In the end, street dirt contains all this stuff. And so we know that if we can control street dirt better, then we can improve water quality. So this was discussed a lot in the previous presentations, and I'm still learning about street sweeping. I'll be the first to admit that. But some of the things I've learned already is that there's a lot of advantages to using street sweeping as a way of controlling pollution. One of the major things is that it's highly cost effective relative to traditional structural stormwater BMPs. And I've seen this firsthand because I've seen City of LA has put in a lot of stormwater projects, and operation and maintenance in particular has always been a challenge. So I know that street sweeping also has requirements for operating, maintaining the fleets, but I feel like, we already have a pretty good handle on that. Structural BMPs also take a long time to get in the ground. There's a lot of permitting. There's the design process, the construction. You always run into things you didn't anticipate with a large structural BMP project. Street sweeping also just makes your city look cleaner. And that's one of the main reasons that it's done in the city of Los Angeles. And just, kind of what we're trying to get across to people in our own organization is that street sweeping can also be a really effective way of removing pollutants. So those are the advantages. So how do we currently sweep? So street sweeping is a requirement of our MS4 permit. And like I mentioned, LA Sanitation is not involved directly in street sweeping. It's covered by our Bureau of Street Services, and there's over 4,700 curb miles that are swept biweekly. And I would say that the primary focus is really on the stuff that you can see, the trash and debris that we can see with the eye. But what is less obvious is the street dirt, and you don't always think of it in these terms, but street dirt is probably where most of the stormwater pollutants are associated with, and those are really what we need to focus on if we're going to think about improving water quality. Next slide. So that gets into our study, and there's kind of three main things that we're asking. How should we be sweeping? And that includes what are the best technologies and approaches to street sweeping. Ryan will talk about some of the comparison testing that we did with the broom sweepers and the regenerative air sweepers. The other things that we're looking at in our study is where street dirt accumulates. So where should we be sweeping and putting most of our effort in? And then, of course, when should we sweep? What are the critical times of the year? Should we put more efforts before the storm season? And then how frequently should we be sweeping in these areas? So that's what our study is examining. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ryan.
Thanks, John. That was a great overview of some of the challenges that the city is facing. We provide a lot of support to the city on all those different TMDLs that John was mentioning at LWA. And we also have some experience doing street sweeping studies for other municipalities in Southern California. So when John came to us with interest in this topic, we were happy to support. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about um, what the study looks like in terms of what we've drawn up, what we've started to collect in terms of data. As John mentioned, or just kind of summarized, we've kind of designed our study around three questions, and it really with the aim of informing specific outcomes or areas where enhancement could occur. So telling us how we could sweep more effectively, which sweeper should we be using and procuring, how should we be operating the sweepers in terms of speed, where to sweep, so understanding how pollutants are accumulating throughout the city. So the city as John mentioned, is very large. There's a lot of differences in sort of the topography, land use, both current and historic. So all of that is potentially driving where you could potentially get the most bang for your buck in terms of, if we're going to enhance sweeping, maybe we should target these areas first. And then the when to sweep, like John mentioned, really looking at sweeping frequency. Where do you start getting diminishing returns? And then also the seasonality. So we have a Mediterranean climate here. And so looking at sweeping, during the wet season versus that period right before the wet season, right around now. How can we potentially use sweeping around some of those factors to yield the greatest benefit with our limited resources? And so these questions are, if you were on the presentation before by Roger and Ranger, these are going to be familiar, and we'll talk about some of the same things, but hopefully this reinforces some of the great points that those two made, and provides some additional context as to the kind of data that you can collect and the value that data can provide. And so I guess I'll also add that in designing the study, we were very sort of outcome focused in terms of how, like, translating the study into specific things that basically telling us what we should be doing, and specifically what Streets LA, the bureau that manages street sweeping, should be doing. So the what, but there's also, in collecting this data, we also had sort of in mind that we need to have maybe the evidence as well to be able to advocate for some of these changes to be made, both to street services or potentially to obtain more resources, funding for street sweeping. And then there's also sort of related questions about quantifying the benefits of street sweeping, both from a prioritization standpoint and also from a regulatory compliance standpoint. Yeah, and I'm sorry about the background noise. I'm in the office today, and I'm not sure if there's anything I can do about that. So the other element of passion is. So I apologize if that's distracting. I could try switching to a different speaker potentially.
Brian, I don't think it's too bad. We can hear you.
Okay. Is this better? I just changed it to a different microphone.
Much better. Much better.
Great. Glad we could figure that out. Yeah. So where was I? So basically, how is LASAN answering those questions? So we're going to talk about three different types of monitoring, and if you were on that presentation earlier, these are the same terms that Roger was using. So, and some of this stuff is complete. Some of this stuff is planned. So first, what we've done so far is controlled environment pickup performance monitoring. So evaluating sweepers in controlled conditions where you can isolate variables and really get at those differences between the sweepers and their different operating conditions.
And then what we have planned is taking that to real streets. So doing the same sort of pickup performance monitoring. How effective are these sweepers at picking up street dirt of various sizes, and comparing them under all the the different real world conditions, different pavement types, different potentially slopes, all these different factors that can influence super performance. And I realize that there's a typo here, but this should say street dirt accumulation monitoring. So going out and actually understanding the street dirt that's out there, and where pollutants are, and how that street dirt is accumulating. And so this stuff is, so we've completed this initial monitoring is kind of a pilot phase of this study. And the rest of the work is planned over the next few years through a special study that we received funding for through the state Safe Clean Water program. It's the impervious surface tax funded stormwater funding, the vehicle that LA has developed in the last 5 to 10 years. I'm also going to talk about another study that we did that LW was a part of for the cities of Burbank and Glendale. Roger, who presented previously, was also a big worked with us on this project, was a big help in terms of implementing this project. And I'm bringing it up to just kind of provide another set of data, and particularly in some of the areas where we haven't collected data yet, provide an example of the kind of data that we will be collecting and some of the results that come out of that. And so this was a study that was done in 2012 as part of a TMDL implementation plan that was really looking at one, trying to understand the benefits of the city, those two cities' current street sweeping programs in terms of pollutant removal, specifically metals, doing some controlled environment testing of potential new sweepers to see what could they achieve, and then going out and actually piloting those sweepers on real streets within those two cities to basically see what benefit they could get and how that could fit into their overall compliance strategy for the metals TMDL they were dealing with. So now I'm going to kind of get into what is this kind of monitoring look like? What kind of data can you generate, and what are some things we're learning by collecting that data? Starting with the sweeper pickup performance monitoring, specifically looking at sweeper type, sweeper speed, and starting with like I mentioned on the previous slide, you can do that in a controlled environment. You can do it on real streets. I'm going to start with the controlled environment testing that we've done. And so what that looks like is you basically, find a simulated track where you got a good curb, where you can, test the sweeper in kind of controlled conditions, away from traffic, away from all the different variables that could be out there in the urban environment. It allows you to measure pickup efficiency a lot more precisely. So you're putting down a known amount of the simulated street dirt. You're measuring how much is left on the street. And so you can get a much more precise estimate of what that pickup looks like. And it also allows you to isolate all your variables. You can obviously look at different sweeper types. You can control the speed really easily. And then you can also vary things like the loading of the street dirt and the texture of the street on which you're doing the testing. And so what we looked at were two sweepers. So currently the city of LA sweeps pretty much entirely, street services sweeps entirely with mechanical sweepers, the Elgin Broom Bear. Roger talked a little bit about how these sweepers work, but basically it's a mechanical broom sweeper. So it's using these brushes to push debris onto a conveyor belt essentially. And that can work pretty well for when you have larger debris. Here we deal with like palm fronds, things like that. And you could also imagine that that's going to perform better on smooth surfaces. those brushes that maybe aren't as able to get into the cracks and crevices of a rough street where those pollutants will accumulate all that street dirt. The other sweeper type we looked at was the regenerative air. It's the Elgin Regen X. It's the crosswind, but same concept. You still have brooms, but that's mostly just to concentrate the material that's on the street, get it away from the curb, and then you have a regenerative air loop that's blowing that debris off of the street into a vacuum pickup pad and then regenerating. And that can be a lot better for smaller debris, sand, silt, dust, street dirt, and also on a rougher surface you could potentially get more removal by kind of getting into those cracks and crevices a little more effectively, at least in theory. So those are the sweepers we tested. In terms of the simulated street dirt, so what is that? You can't just go to the store and buy simulated street dirt. So what we did there is we procured a variety of silica sand and clay products in different particle sizes so that we could get a recipe that was as close as we could to kind of the range of real street dirt based on data that's available from studies that have been done in the Southern California area. And the other thing is that silica has a similar specific gravity to real street dirt. So as whatever that pickup mechanism is coming through the brooms, the regenerative air, that street dirt's going to respond similarly to those forces. And so it's a fairly involved process. You got to procure all the different components, mix them in a cement mixer, weigh them out for your different trials. But it provides a really good proxy for that real street dirt. For the testing, we did this at a city water reclamation plant. This is a great location to do this type of work because one, it's city owned, so access wasn't an issue. But then you also have minimal traffic in the area that we found. You've got curbs, which are essential to effective street sweeper performance, as Roger really emphasized in the previous presentation. And then this specific location, we had conveniently there were two in the street that we identified. There were kind of two sides, and one had been recently resurfaced, and the other was a bit older. So that allowed us to do some testing on street surface type. So not just looking at like an immaculate, smooth piece of pavement, but also some rougher aged street that might be more indicative of some of the areas out there in the real world. And those were 50 by 10 foot study areas. And so I'll talk about on the next slide. So what does that testing actually look like? So first, we went through with that test track with the sweeper that was being tested. You do multiple passes to make sure the sweeper is that test track is starting from a clean state. Also gives you an opportunity to get the street sweeper dialed in terms of the broom placements, getting the speed right. We then go through with that industrial shop vac, stainless steel to avoid contamination. You put a filter in there as well to make sure you don't lose that really fine material. And so we do another pass before we do anything, just to make sure that we're starting from zero. Once the street that test track is super clean, we used a fertilizer spreader to disperse 5 pounds of that simulated street dirt along the test track. And that amount was selected based on data that we were able to get from other studies in terms of what's a reasonable amount of street dirt to expect on an urban street. And you can see after you applied it, it also has the benefit of that silica is white, so it's really easy to see where it is and make sure you're getting all of it whenever you're doing the post sweeping pickup, which I'll talk about a little bit more. So once you kind of have your street dirt out, you can then test whatever trial you want to look at, combination of sweepers and speeds. Once the sweeper's gone through, you go back through with that shop vac, collect what's left on that street, really carefully, watching the speed at which you're moving that nozzle, making sure you're getting everything. Then very carefully, you can take that material that's in the drum of the shop vac, decant that into your sample containers, and we submitted that to the lab for particle size analysis. And so through that process, we tested, I think it was 10 different trials. So both sweepers on the 2 different surface test tracks, and then looked at a range of speeds from 5 to 15 miles per hour. 5 being kind of the manufacturer recommended speed, and then 10 and 15 mile per hour being the upper end of what operators might actually do in the field under certain situations. So what did we find? So at a high level, just looking at just gross street dirt pickup, there was a very clear difference between the regenerative air and the mechanical. So with the regenerative air on smooth surface, which in both cases, the smooth surface, unsurprisingly, we were able to pick up a lot more of that street dirt. Regenerative air was about 80%, and the mechanical was down about 50%, a little bit under that. And so I mentioned that the rough surface was generally, you got less pickup, but one thing that was really interesting was that difference was less pronounced for the regenerative air sweeper. So you can see the mechanical sweeper performance dropped by looks like about half, maybe a little bit more than that, whereas you only drop from 80 to 70% with that regenerative air. So showing a greater ability to get into those cracks in the pavement and get that material out and into your hopper. And yeah, and then in both cases, so even if you're sweeping on using a regenerative air sweeper on a pretty chunky street, you're still getting a lot more performance than the mechanical would on kind of the ideal conditions a smooth street. So another thing we looked at was sweeper speed, and so we've got the regenerative air in blue and the mechanical in orange, and then the solid and the dashed lines indicate smooth and rough street surfaces. And so barring a little bit of anomaly with the mechanical on smooth, you did see a decline as expected in performance as speed increased. What was interesting is that the regenerative air, regardless of how fast you ran it, performed better than, and regardless of the street type actually too, it performed better than the best performance that we saw with the mechanical, which suggests that if you wanted to, you could potentially run your sweeper faster, get more mileage covered per hour of operator time, and get a lot more pollutant removal. Or you could go more slowly and really get maximize your pollutant removal. Either way, you're getting a lot more performance than you would under a scenario where you're only using those mechanical sweepers. So we didn't just look at street dirt as a whole. We looked at that particle size distribution. That's really important because your pollutants are not, typically aren't distributed evenly in that street dirt, which ranges from really, really fine clay and silt particles up to essentially sand, gravel, larger material. Most of the pollutants we care about, metals, a lot of the organics, tend to be most concentrated in those finer particles, in the very small to 250 microns, typically where you see kind of greater concentrations. And so a sweeper that's able to pick up those fines is really what you need if your goal is to remove pollutants. And so when we tested the sweepers, again, this is the blue is the regenerative air, orange is the mechanical. these results are just on the rough surface track for demonstration purposes. What we saw again was, well, one, looking at those big particles, the almost gravel sized, you saw again, the regenerative air was better, but the difference wasn't huge. They're fairly close together, but as you got down to finer and finer particle sizes, that gap continued to grow. And once you got down below like 250 microns, which again is kind of where you start to see higher concentrations of a lot of the pollutants of concern, your mechanical sweeper was basically doing nothing, and the regenerative air sweepers were continuing to pick that material up, so getting you that pollutant. Another thing that we noticed in this data was the difference in speed, the speed difference, the speed impact on performance. Looking at the regenerative air was maybe not quite as pronounced with larger particles, but it did seem to widen as you got down to those finer particle sizes. So it might be more important from a pollutant removal standpoint to manage your operating speed, have protocols in place to do that. So what this result really tells us is that, that graph that we saw that I just showed that showed the difference in sweeper performance from a overall street dirt removal, that difference is going to be even pronounced when you look at the pollutants themselves, because of that difference in overall performance seems to be driven by the sweeper's ability to pick up those fine particles. And so, like I think I mentioned, the Burbank and Glendale study also did some controlled environment sweeper testing. I'm not going to get super into the trials and the variables they tested, but I think suffice it to say that they found similar results. Much better performance with regenerative air and vacuum, up into the 80% pickup efficiency range, consistent with what we found. And with the mechanical, looks like they had some results that were a little bit higher, but definitely lower than what they saw with the regenerative air and vacuum, 50-60% pickup efficiency. And so I think I've kind of made some of these points, but really, when you look at regenerative air and vacuum sweepers, you're going to get a lot more street dirt removal than mechanical sweepers. And because that difference is strongest with respect to those fine particles, you're going to get a lot more pollutant removal by using sweepers. And that could translate, and I'll talk a little bit more about kind of what this means, putting this in context in terms of pollutant removal, on the order of 2 to 6 times more in terms of metals removal. And then in addition to that, you've got the difference in performance on rough streets. So the regenerative air sweepers are going to be more effective on a greater percentage of your streets. Roger talked about the importance of maintaining pavement condition. That might not always be possible. So having a sweeper that can perform well throughout your street network is really important. And then basically observing that the manufacturer recommendation for lower speeds, that holds, especially for those fine particles. So making sure you're operating your sweepers at appropriate speed is important. So that's controlled environment testing. Another way of looking at this is on real streets, where you can kind of test under those real conditions that sweepers will be exposed to, the surface textures that are out there, real street dirt, so not using that simulant, and then also dealing with the effects of you've got trash, you've got debris, you've got different things that are going to impact sweep performance. By doing real street pickup performance monitoring, you're also able to actually test in terms of the pollutants. You don't have to make that extrapolation from particle size of the simulated street dirt to what a pollutant would be doing. You can actually measure the pollutants. And it allows you just an opportunity to field verify what you saw in those controlled environment tests, to kind of provide additional information to support these decisions around what sweepers we're using. So for the LA sand study, over the next couple of years, we're going to be doing testing of 3 approaches. We're looking at the mechanical sweeper again, the current sweeper, a regenerative air, and we're also going to look at tandem sweeping, where you run a regenerative air behind a mechanical sweeper to see kind of what the benefit of that would be, whether that would be a cost-effective option. If we're not able to completely, swap out mechanical. I mean, there's some benefits to mechanical sweepers. So an option might be to use those regenerative air sweepers in high priority, high pollutant areas. We're going to go out on an existing route where we can kind of find 3 sections that offer comparable conditions, so we can get a real apples to apples comparison of these different sweepers. And then within those test sections, can go out and evaluate the performance at multiple locations to get kind of a representative sample of how the sweepers are performing. So what is this testing methodology look like? It's really similar to the controlled environment in terms of you're collecting the street dirt before, you're collecting the street dirt after, how much pollutants, how much material was there before, how much there was after, and then calculating the difference. And that's what went up into your sweeper. On your identified street segment, you identify through a random selection process your pre-sweep areas. You mark those so you don't sample them again when you do your post-sweep sampling. And you're basically taking that shop vac and going from the curb to the crown and getting all the material that's there, and then compositing that for multiple locations along that street segment, because there is going to be a lot of variability in terms of how pollutants accumulate. And so we don't have data to share yet on that, but Burbank and Glendale did look at this, both looking at their existing program, which was primarily mechanical sweepers. When they went out and measured the performance of that program, they were getting somewhere in the negative 10 to 25% street dirt removal. You do have some negative numbers because there's still a lot of variability out there in terms of, was a car parked over that spot all week? There's just a lot of variability, which is why you do the controlled environment testing. But in general, you did see street dirt removal. When they went out and piloted the new sweepers, generally, the numbers went up. You got more street dirt removal as expected. But again, there was quite a bit of variability, and in designing kind of our real street testing, we're trying to control for those factors, trying to find really similar locations, similar conditions, similar street surface textures, doing the testing on the same day. So you can try to control for those factors and minimize that noise so you can better detect that difference in the sweepers. So that's kind of how you can look at different sweepers in terms of their performance. Got about 10 minutes left, so I'll try to get through this quickly. Street dirt accumulation monitoring. This is where you're going out and trying to understand the dynamics of the street dirt itself, where and how are pollutants accumulating. We're approaching this with kind of 3 types of sampling in mind, with they're kind of getting at different monitoring questions. So what we're calling general characterization is basically going out across the city's watersheds and collecting samples that can be tied to a land use, tied to a street size, arterials versus side streets, different watersheds, different areas of the city have different sort of industrial histories, current land uses, various socioeconomic factors. And through that data, we want to be able to help understand where those pollutant loadings are highest, where we should be prioritizing if we're going to invest in different sweepers, more frequent sweeping, those kinds of things. Accumulation monitoring, I guess that's a little bit redundant, but it's really focused on the accumulation rates. So not just going out there at one point in time, but going to a site over multiple times to really get at the question of how often to sweep. So currently the city has a lot of biweekly sweeping. So looking at less different periods, if we did 1 week, has that street dirt accumulated enough that would be efficient to go out there and sweep it? How much would you be able to get from that? Are there diminishing returns? And then seasonal, what's the value of sweeping at different times of year? So I kind of talked about this a lot, but basically, general characterization is just going on getting emphasis on sample, on the number of locations and the number of factors that we're representing. And the sample collection approach is similar to that real street testing. You're basically just doing a pre-sweep sample. And we're doing that on swept streets because so that we know how long that accumulation has been happening. You can kind of compare sites with similar accumulation periods. In terms of monitoring the accumulation rate, this conceptual diagram kind of illustrates kind of a phenomenon that's been observed with street dirt where you don't have street dirt can't just accumulate infinitely on streets. There's some maximum balancing of the amount of storage that's available on the street and factors like turbulence from cars, wind. You reach some equilibrium where you don't get any more material on the street, and so by sweeping kind of close to that asymptote, that peak, you can maximize your efficiency. So trying to understand what that accumulation curve looks like in different areas, and specifically, what's the difference between sweeping at 1 week versus 2 weeks? So we're looking at that. And then seasonal, it's really around this wet dry difference that really underlies everything that we do in the city of OA in terms of managing stormwater. So what is the value of sweeping? Should we send sweepers out in prioritized areas during the month before the storm? And then what is the value of going between storms? Where are we going to get the most benefit? And so that's accumulation monitoring on a select number of sites at different times of year to kind of understand that variable a little bit better. And so we don't have data, but we do have these results from the cities of Burbank, Glendale. As you can see, they focused on metals, but they have data from different land uses and saw pretty stark differences. Industrial areas had a lot of copper and cadmium. The arterials in commercial areas had more lead and zinc. So this just kind of illustrates that by understanding how these pollutants behave, you can better target your sweeping in areas where you're gonna intersect more of them and get them off the streets. This is kind of where with the sweeper testing, that's a little less municipality specific. So at this point, it's pretty established that these regenerative air sweepers are going to get you a lot more benefit, but with respect to understanding how pollutants accumulate, it's going to be regional, that's going to be local in terms of the factors driving those pollutants and how they the different sources and all of that, and how they're distributed throughout your municipality. And then in terms of other pollutants, we've got a lot of data on metals, but there's a lot of other pollutants out there that we're dealing with or will be dealing with. So understanding those is really important. We'll kind of go through these slides pretty quickly, but basically reiterating the point, trying to put this in context, you can greatly increase the amount of copper metals that you remove by using regenerative air versus mechanical sweeping. If you apply that to all 4,700 plus curb miles bi-weekly, it translates to a lot of additional metals removable and potentially similar benefits for other pollutants. Burbank and Glendale, the numbers are in the same ballpark with respect to street dirt removal sediment and metals, basically telling you the same thing. There's a lot of potential to improve. And with that, I'll turn it back over to John to kind of provide some closing thoughts, and hopefully we have a couple of minutes for questions.
Well, thank you, Ryan. I think I'd like to just leave room for questions. I think, the take home for me from all this is that controlling and picking up street dirt can be an effective way at improving water quality. And so if we find better ways of picking up street dirt, we'll get better water quality. And so that's what the city of LA is trying to learn. There's other things that go into a street sweeping program. Our focus is really on the water quality aspect, but I think there's a lot of opportunity there. With that, I think we can open it up to questions.
Yes, we have a question from Dorinda. Excuse me. Any wetback sweeping performance information available versus the dryback sweeping? We only use wetback sweepers on construction projects, as does the city of San Francisco DPW on city streets.
Ryan, do you want to take that one?
Most of the testing we've done has been was the controlled environment testing, and we primarily doing that without water spray assistance, just for the purpose of being able to test those sweepers quickly without needing to allow the street to dry. But that the water use does play into the performance to some extent, but I think that there are newer sweeper technologies that allow you to sweep without having to use as much water. And Roger, if he's still on, might be able to speak to that.
Okay. Hi, Roger.
Okay. Just to comment, it's a big issue. And when you said wet versus dry, in other words, the tests were run with a spray bar, that would be wet, whereas dry would be simply picking it up dry. What we found is it does increase the time for the testing process. In fact, it likely doubles the cost of actually the test procedure, because you got to wait for the pavement to dry before you can attempt to pick up the material. So no, I've only done a couple of tests back in 2008 for Elgin, where we used wet versus dry and came up with that difference, but haven't investigated it any further. So good question.
Okay, we have a comment here from Faizan. It'll be interesting to see how trash impacts the effectiveness of regenerative air sweeping in removing finer particles like plastic cups, bottles, large chip, candy wrappers, straws, etc. So I guess if Faizan is saying that maybe that would impede possibly picking up the fines.
I wouldn't think that is the case. One thing we do know is that if you're using a vacuum or a regenerative air, you got to be careful you not run over something too big that gets caught in the return flow pipe, because that can create a big problem for the operation. You're down, and sometimes it's been very difficult to remove whatever it is that sucks up. But no, when it comes to litter, the street sweeper is going to pick up 100% of everything it touches. It's just the nature of the beast, because litter is light. We don't know about microplastics because they're associated with fines. So do the fines armor them so they don't get picked up? I don't know. But I would say litter, using street sweepers to pick up litter is a waste of resources.
Okay. And just one last quick question, because we're just about out of time. Maybe you can answer this in a 15-second way. If we leave coarser projects on the street, if they're left on the street, do they become finer particles?
Yeah, I think that has been demonstrated, particularly like leaf litter, things like that. And another thing to consider is that with mechanical sweepers, it's been documented that you can actually have those sweepers can break down material. You end up with just a bunch more fine material that doesn't get picked up by the sweeper. So potentially using a vacuum sweeper, you can get that material without breaking it down.
All right. Well, thank you. And this has been a great workshop. Thank you, John. Thank you, Ryan. Great presentation. Good information. So we have one more workshop. It's this very next hour, starting right now, on street sweeping and more on data on streets from Southern California. So if you're like this topic, jump into the next workshop right now. It's starting right now. All right. Thank you, everyone.